Chapter 1. Friday Night Revelations. The restaurant pulsed with life. Warm lights glowed against polished wood, laughter ricocheted off the walls, and the scent of garlic butter and grilled steak hung thick in the air. Donovan adjusted the cuff of his shirt, trying to ignore the faint thrum of anxiety in his chest. Friday nights were supposed to be fun, weren't they? A little escape from the grind, a chance to relax with friends. And tonight was special. His fiancée, Marissa, had insisted on gathering their closest circle for dinner and dancing. Curtis smiled at her across the table. She was radiant in a sapphire dress that hugged her curves, her hair swept up in a way that made her neck look impossibly elegant. 9 months engaged, 3 years together, and he still felt that flicker of awe when he looked at her. "You okay?" Marissa leaned in, her voice soft over the chatter. "Yeah," Curtis said, forcing a grin. "Just hungry. This place smells amazing." John laughed from the other side of Marissa, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair. "You're always hungry, man. Remember that road trip? You stopped at every diner we passed." Curtis chuckled, though the sound felt hollow. John, the best friend. The guy Marissa met in college, the guy she swore was like a brother. Curtis had believed her, wanted to believe her. But lately, the signs had been stacking up like poker chips he couldn't ignore. The late-night texts she brushed off as just memes. The way John always seemed to know things about her day before Curtis did. The inside jokes that left him smiling politely while they laughed like co-conspirators. He told himself he wasn't insecure. He hated that word, like it was a scarlet letter for men who refused to accept disrespect. No, he was rational, observant. But tonight, he promised himself he wouldn't spiral. He'd enjoy the evening. The waiter arrived with a tray of cocktails, and conversation flowed like the wine. Curtis laughed at a story about someone's disastrous camping trip, nodded through a debate about the best Marvel movie, and tried not to notice how often Marissa's hand brushed John's arm. Halfway through the night, Curtis excused himself. "Be right back," he said, pushing his chair back. The bathroom was a sanctuary of cool tile and soft jazz piped through hidden speakers. Curtis splashed water on his face, stared at his reflection. "You're fine. She loves you. Stop overthinking." He dried his hands, squared his shoulders, and stepped back into the chaos of Friday night. And froze. On the dance floor, under a canopy of twinkling lights, Marissa and John swayed close, too close. Her arms looped around his neck, his hands anchored at her waist. They were whispering, smiling, and then, like a slow-motion car crash, John dipped his head and kissed her. Curtis felt the air punch out of his lungs. For a second, he thought maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe it was a friendly peck, a European thing. But then her lips lingered. Her fingers curled into his shirt, and the truth slammed into Curtis like a freight train. They were kissing, and the worst part? Their friends saw it. He could see them watching, grinning, pretending not to notice while their eyes flicked between the couple and their drinks. No one looked shocked. No one looked ready to intervene, because they weren't his friends. They were hers. Curtis stood there, rooted to the spot, while 1,000 thoughts screamed through his head. He could storm over, make a scene, demand answers. He could shout, curse, throw the ring in her face. But what would that change? The betrayal was already carved into stone. Instead, he turned, walked past the bar, past the laughter, past the smell of garlic butter that now made him nauseous. He found the back door, pushed it open, and stepped into the cool night air. His car waited like an old friend. Curtis slid behind the wheel, gripping the steering column until his knuckles whitened. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just drove. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. At his apartment, he moved like a man possessed, pulling clothes from drawers, tossing toiletries into a duffel. His engagement ring sat heavy on his finger, mocking him. He yanked it off, set it on the kitchen table, and grabbed a pen. The note was short. Brutal. "Thanks for wasting 3 years of my life." He stared at the words for a moment, then placed the ring on top like a period at the end of a sentence. Curtis zipped his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out without looking back. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. Curtis drove with no destination, just the primal need to put miles between himself and the wreckage of his life. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, Marissa's name lighting up the screen. "Where are you?" He didn't answer, didn't even open the message. Instead, he pulled onto the shoulder, killed the engine, and sat in silence. The night was thick with crickets and the distant hum of traffic. Curtis picked up his phone, thumbed through his contacts, and began the purge. Blocked her number. Blocked her on social media. Deleted photos, messages, every trace of her existence. 20 minutes later, his digital world was scrubbed clean. He was done. When the world falls apart, you do what every person does. You go home to lick your wounds. Curtis started the car, merging back onto the highway. Home was 2 hours away, a small town where his parents still lived, where life moved slower and people knew your name. He hadn't planned to go back, but plans were for people whose lives hadn't just imploded. As the miles ticked by, Curtis felt something strange, a flicker of relief under the ache. He'd spent months ignoring the signs, swallowing his instincts to avoid being labeled insecure. But tonight proved what he'd known deep down. Respecting yourself isn't insecurity. It's survival. His phone buzzed again, notifications piling up like vultures. He ignored them all. Let her scream into the void. Let her twist the story online. Strangers' opinions were worth less than nothing. Curtis tightened his grip on the wheel, eyes fixed on the horizon. Ahead lay silence, family, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to start over. Chapter 2. Homecoming. The highway gave way to rolling fields and sleepy towns, the kind of places where porch lights glowed like beacons and gas stations doubled as gossip hubs. Curtis's shoulders loosened as the city fell behind him. The ache in his chest was still there, raw, insistent, but the silence of the open road was a balm. By the time he pulled into his parents' driveway, dawn was smudging the horizon with pink and gold. The Donovan house stood like a familiar fortress, white siding, wraparound porch, wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. Curtis killed the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the home that had seen every version of him. Awkward teenager, ambitious college grad, man who thought he had love figured out. The front door opened before he even reached the steps. His mom, petite and fierce in a robe patterned with sunflowers, squinted into the morning light. Curtis. Her voice cracked like a whip. What on earth, why didn't you call? He managed a tired smile. Hi, Mom. She was down the steps in a flash, arms wrapping around him like a life preserver. You scared me half to death. I thought you were in Atlanta with Marissa. Curtis stiffened at the name. Not anymore. His mom pulled back, eyes narrowing. What happened? Long story, Curtis said, hefting his duffel. Can I tell you inside? The kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls, his mom's coping mechanism for any crisis. She shoved a mug into his hands before he could protest. Start talking, she said, sliding into a chair. And don't you dare leave out details. Curtis stared into the steam curling from his cup. She cheated. The words hung heavy in the air. His mom's face went through a rapid-fire slideshow of emotions. Shock, anger, heartbreak, before settling on something steely. With who? She demanded. John, Curtis said flatly. Her best friend. His mom's jaw dropped. That smug little. Oh, I never liked him. Always thought he was too smiley. Curtis almost laughed. Smiley. Smiley in that fake. I'm your best buddy, but I do steal your wallet way. She crossed her arms. And she kissed him? In public. On the dance floor, Curtis said. In front of everyone. His mom let out a low whistle. Well, that takes a special kind of stupid. Curtis rubbed his temples. I didn't make a scene. Just left. Packed my stuff. Left the ring and a note. What did the note say? Thanks for wasting 3 years of my life. His mom blinked. Ouch. Too harsh. No, she said, lips twitching. Perfect. By the time his dad wandered in, hair mussed, flannel pajama pants hanging low, Curtis had recounted the whole saga. His dad listened without interrupting, then clapped a hand on Curtis's shoulder. You did the right thing, he said simply. No sense staying where you're not respected. Curtis nodded, throat tight. He'd expected disappointment, maybe even a lecture about forgiveness. Instead, he got quiet solidarity. It was almost worse, because it made the reality sink in. This wasn't a bad dream. It was his life now. The Donovan family had a rule. When one of them was in trouble, they circled the wagons. By noon, his older brother, Ryan, had shown up with a six-pack and a grin that was equal parts sympathy and mischief. Bro, Ryan said, pulling Curtis into a bear hug. You okay? Define okay, Curtis muttered. Ryan dropped onto the couch, cracking open a beer. Well, you're not in jail, so that's a start. Curtis snorted. Tempting, though. Ryan's grin faded. Seriously, you did the right thing. Marissa, man, I thought she was solid. Me too, Curtis said quietly. Guess I was wrong. Ryan leaned back, studying him. So what now? Curtis shrugged. No idea. Just need space. Time. Ryan nodded. You've got both. And hey, Dad could use help at the company. You still good with marketing? Curtis hesitated. Yeah, I guess. Then come on board, Ryan said. We'll keep you busy. Distract you from all this. Curtis managed to smile. Thanks. That night, Curtis lay in his childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above him. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of crickets. His phone sat dark on the nightstand, silent now that he'd blocked Marissa from every corner of his life. He thought about the kiss. About the way her fingers curled into John's shirt like she'd been waiting for that moment. About the friends who watched and said nothing. The betrayal burned, but beneath it was something colder, clarity. He'd spent years believing love was enough. That trust was automatic. That loyalty was a given. Turns out, love wasn't a shield. It was a gamble. And Curtis was done betting on people who treated commitment like a suggestion. The next morning, his mom ambushed him with pancakes and unsolicited wisdom. You're not broken, she said, flipping a golden disc onto his plate. You're bruised. Big difference. Curtis raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure I feel broken. Bruises heal, she said firmly. And you've got the whole family behind you. We'll get you through this. He smiled faintly. Thanks, Mom. She patted his hand. And when you're ready, you'll find someone who deserves you. Curtis didn't answer. He wasn't ready. Might never be. Later, Curtis drove to the family business, a modest but thriving construction company his dad had built from scratch. The office smelled like sawdust and ambition. Ryan was already there, barking orders into a headset. Kurt, Ryan waved him over. Welcome to the circus. Curtis grinned despite himself. Glad to be here. Ryan clapped him on the back. We'll start you on marketing. New contracts, fresh ads. You'll kill it. Curtis nodded, feeling the first stirrings of purpose. Work he could handle. Work didn't lie, didn't kiss best friends on dance floors. That night, Curtis sat on the porch with his dad, nursing a beer while fireflies blinked in the yard. You know, his dad said, pain doesn't mean you stop living. It means you start smarter. Curtis stared at the horizon. Smarter how? By knowing what you want and what you won't tolerate, his dad said. That's not insecurity. That's self-respect. Curtis let the words settle. Maybe he wasn't broken. Maybe he was just recalibrating. As the stars pricked the sky, Curtis made himself a quiet promise. He'd rebuild, piece by piece. And if love ever came knocking again, it would have to prove it was real, because Curtis Donovan was done playing the fool. Chapter 3. Sawdust and Sage Advice. Curtis had forgotten how loud construction offices could be. Phones ringing, printers humming, the occasional crash of a dropped tool from the warehouse. It was chaos wrapped in drywall. But for the first time in weeks, Curtis felt useful. Marketing was his wheelhouse, and the company needed a facelift. He sat at his desk, sketching ideas for a new ad campaign. The old flyers were relics from the early 2000s, clip art hammers, and slogans like, "We nail it." Curtis winced every time he saw one. Ryan popped his head in. "How's the creative genius doing?" Curtis smirked. "Trying to make us look less like a yard sale and more like a business." Ryan laughed. "Good luck." "Oh, and Dad wants you to meet Rick. He's in the break room." "Rick?" Curtis asked. "Old guy, been with us forever. Knows everyone, everything, and probably where Jimmy Hoff is buried. You'll like him." The break room smelled like burnt coffee and powdered donuts. At the table sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from oak, broad shoulders, weathered face, gray beard that could hide a family of squirrels. He wore a flannel shirt and a grin that was equal parts charm and trouble. "You must be Curtis," Rick said, voice gravelly but warm. "The prodigal son returns." Curtis chuckled. "Something like that." Rick gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Tell me your sins." Curtis blinked. "My sins." Rick waved a hand. Figure of speech. "Ryan says you've been through hell." Curtis hesitated, then sat. "Yeah." Engagement blew up. Rick nodded sagely. The old heart heist." Curtis frowned. "Heart heist." Rick leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "That's what I call it when someone steals your trust, your time, and your dignity, all while smiling in your face." Curtis stared. "That's accurate." Rick grinned. "Happened to me twice. First wife ran off with a yoga instructor. Second wife ran off with my best friend. Guess what his name was?" Curtis raised an eyebrow. "John." Rick slapped the table. "Bingo. Must be something about that name." Curtis laughed despite himself. "So what did you do?" "First time, I cried into a bottle of Jack. Second time, I bought a Harley and rode to Montana." Rick shrugged. "Both worked." Curtis shook his head, smiling. "You're something else." Rick leaned forward, eyes twinkling. "Listen, kid. Love's a scam for stupid men." Curtis blinked. "That's comforting." Rick grinned. "I'm serious. Never fall in love with something that can rip out your heart while smiling at your face." Curtis chuckled. "Sounds like you've got trust issues." "Damn right," Rick said. "But here's the kicker. I still believe in love." Curtis frowned. "Wait. You just said," "I said love's a scam," Rick interrupted. "Doesn't mean I don't buy the ticket. Just means I read the fine print." Curtis laughed, shaking his head. "You're a contradiction." Rick winked. "Best kind." Over the next hour, Curtis learned more about Rick than he'd learned about some college roommates. Rick had stories. Wild, hilarious, occasionally tragic. He talked about near-death experiences on job sites, poker nights that ended in fistfights, and the time he accidentally adopted a goat. By the time Curtis left the break room, his mood had lifted. Rick was like a human pressure valve, crude, wise, and funny in a way that made pain feel less sharp. Weeks passed, and Curtis threw himself into work. He revamped the company's website, launched a social media campaign, and even convinced Ryan to shoot a promo video that didn't look like it was filmed on a flip phone. Business picked up. Contracts rolled in. Curtis felt steady, but loneliness lingered like a shadow. He told himself he didn't need anyone, that love was a rare phenomenon, maybe even a myth. He'd been burned too many times to play with fire again. Then came Shiela. It started small, just a smile across the office, a shared joke about Ryan's obsession with motivational posters. Shiela was sharp, funny, and had a laugh that could make a Monday feel like Friday. Curtis noticed, but he didn't act. Couldn't act. His heart was a locked vault, and he'd lost the key somewhere between betrayal and self-preservation. His family noticed, though. Donovan clan didn't miss a beat. One night at dinner, his mom dropped the bomb. "So, Shiela seems nice." Curtis froze mid-bite. "What?" Ryan smirked. "She's cute, smart, and she laughs at your terrible jokes." Curtis rolled his eyes. "We work together." His mom grinned. "So did your father and I." Curtis groaned. "Please don't start." Ryan leaned back, smug. "Face it, bro. You've been single for 3 years. Time to rejoin the human race." Curtis stabbed a piece of chicken like it owed him money. "Not interested." Rick, who'd somehow scored an invite to dinner, chimed in. "Kid, you're living a half-life. You need a spark." Curtis shot him a look. "Didn't you say love's a scam?" Rick grinned. "Sure. But scams are fun if you know the rules." Curtis laughed despite himself. "You're all insane." His mom patted his hand. "We just want you happy." Curtis didn't answer. Happiness felt like a foreign language, a word he used to know but couldn't pronounce anymore. Later that night, Curtis sat on his porch, nursing a beer and staring at the stars. Rick's words echoed in his head. Living a half-life. Was that what he was doing? Working, sleeping, existing, but not really living? He thought about Sheila's smile, about the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, about how easy it felt to talk to her. Curtis sighed. He wasn't ready. Maybe he'd never be ready. But for the first time in years, the idea didn't feel impossible. Just terrifying. Chapter 4. Sparks and Sabotage. Curtis had a plan. A simple, foolproof plan. Keep his head down, focus on work, and avoid anything that smelled like romance. Unfortunately, his family had a different plan, one that involved Shiela, subtle hints, and zero respect for boundaries. It started with his mom accidentally inviting Shiela to Sunday dinner. Curtis walked into the kitchen, expecting roast chicken and peace. Instead, he found Shiela laughing with his mom over a bowl of mashed potatoes. Surprise, his mom chirped, like she'd just invented joy. Shiela was in town, so I thought, why not? Curtis blinked. Why not what? Why not have her join us? His mom's smile was weaponized sweetness. You two work together, after all. Shiela turned, her smile easy and warm. Hope you don't mind. Curtis forced a grin. Of course not. Inside, he was screaming. Dinner was a circus. Ryan kept tossing Curtis looks like you're welcome, while Rick, because of course Rick was there, decided to play matchmaker with all the subtlety of a chainsaw. So, Shiela, Rick said, leaning forward like a detective in a bad cop show. What's your stance on heartbreak? Shiela laughed. Against it? Rick nodded gravely. Good answer. Curtis, here's a recovering victim. Curtis groaned. Rick held up a hand. No shame in the truth, kid. You got burned. Twice if I recall. Once, Curtis muttered. Feels like twice, Rick said. Anyway, Shiela, you strike me as the loyal type. Shiela smiled. I try. Rick slapped the table. See? Keep her. Curtis buried his face in his hands. Please stop. His mom patted his arm. We're just talking. Curtis muttered. Feels like an ambush. Ryan grinned. You'll live. After dinner, Curtis walked Shiela to her car because he was raised right, even if his family was trying to ruin his life. Sorry about all that, Curtis said, shoving his hands in his pockets. Shiela laughed. Don't be. Your family's hilarious. That's one word for it. She tilted her head. They care about you. Curtis shrugged. Sometimes too much. Shiela smiled. Could be worse. They could ignore you. Curtis met her eyes, and for a second, something flickered. Warm, dangerous, tempting. He looked away fast. Drive safe, he said. You too. She replied, sliding into her car. Curtis watched her taillights disappear, heart thudding like a traitor. The next day at work, Rick cornered him in the break room. So, Rick said, pouring coffee like he owned the place. You gonna ask her out? Curtis blinked. What? No. Rick snorted. Why not? Because, Curtis said, grabbing a donut like it owed him money. I'm not doing that again. Rick leaned against the counter, eyes twinkling. Kid, you're acting like love's a bear trap. Curtis bit into the donut. It is. Rick chuckled. Nah, it's more like poker. You play smart, you win big. You play dumb, you lose your shirt. Curtis raised an eyebrow. You lost your shirt twice. Rick grinned. And pants. Still worth the ride. Curtis shook his head. You're insane. Rick clapped him on the back. Maybe. But listen, don't let fear turn you into a ghost. Life's short. Love's messy. Dive in anyway. Curtis stared at him. That's your advice? Rick grinned. That, and never date anyone who says, I'm not like other girls. Red flag the size of Texas. Curtis laughed despite himself. Noted. Weeks rolled by, and Curtis kept his distance, mostly. But Shiela had a way of slipping past his defenses. She'd pop into his office with a joke, share memes that made him snort coffee, and once brought him lunch because you looked like you were about to eat your stapler. Curtis told himself it was harmless. Friendly. Nothing more. Then came the company barbecue. The Donovan Construction annual barbecue was legendary. Burgers, beer, and enough gossip to fuel a soap opera. Curtis showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, determined to blend into the background. That lasted 5 minutes. Curtis, his mom called, waving him over to a picnic table where Shiela sat, laughing with Ryan. Curtis sighed and walked over, bracing for impact. Hey, Shiela said, smiling like sunshine. Grab a seat. Curtis sat, trying to ignore the way his pulse jumped. Ryan smirked like a man watching his favorite sitcom. So, Ryan said, Shiela was just telling us about her dog. Curtis raised an eyebrow. Dog. Max, Shiela said. Golden retriever. Total goofball. Curtis smiled. Sounds like a good guy. Better than most men, Rick muttered, appearing out of nowhere with a plate piled high with ribs. Curtis groaned. Rick plopped down beside him. Relax, kid. Just making conversation. Ryan grinned. Sure you are. Rick winked at Curtis. You know what dogs teach us? Curtis sighed. What? Unconditional love, Rick said, biting into a rib. And how to beg for scraps without shame. Shiela laughed, and Curtis couldn't help but smile. Damn it. Later, as the sun dipped low and fireflies blinked in the grass, Curtis found himself walking with Shiela near the edge of the field. Music drifted from a speaker, soft and lazy. Nice night, Shiela said. Yeah, Curtis replied, hands shoved in his pockets. She glanced at him. You okay? You've been quiet. Curtis hesitated. Just thinking. About. He looked at her, really looked at her, the curve of her smile, the kindness in her eyes. And for the first time in years, the walls around his heart cracked. About how life doesn't always go the way you plan, he said softly. Sheila smiled. Sometimes that's a good thing. Curtis swallowed hard. Maybe. They stood there, silence stretching like a thread. Curtis wanted to say more, wanted to tell her she made him feel something he thought was dead, but fear held him back. Instead, he said, "You want a soda?" Sheila laughed. Sure. Curtis walked toward the cooler, heart pounding like a drum. He wasn't ready. But maybe, just maybe, he was willing to try. Chapter 5. Ghosts and Grenades. Curtis had never been good at small talk, but lately he found himself craving it, especially when Sheila was involved. She had a way of making conversation feel effortless, like tossing pebbles into a pond and watching the ripples dance. They were in the office break room, sharing a laugh over Rick's latest disaster story, something about accidentally locking himself in a porta potty during a job site inspection. Curtis was mid-sip of coffee when Rick himself barged in, grinning like a man who'd just discovered fire. "Curtis," Rick boomed. "Got a minute?" Curtis groaned. "Do I have a choice?" Rick slapped a dog-eared notebook on the table. "Behold, the gospel according to Rick." Sheila raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Always," Curtis muttered. Rick flipped the notebook open with a flourish. Chapter 1. How to Survive Love Without Losing Your Shirt. Curtis rubbed his temples. "Rick, Rule 1, Rick said, ignoring him. "Never date anyone who says, 'I'm not crazy.' They're lying." Sheila laughed. "That's oddly specific." Rick wagged a finger. "Rule 2. If she orders a salad on the first date, run." Curtis frowned. "Why?" "Because," Rick said solemnly, "she's pretending. Real women eat fries." Curtis snorted. "That's your metric for honesty?" "Damn right," Rick said. "Rule 3. Never trust a man named John." Curtis froze, coffee halfway to his lips. Sheila glanced at him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Rick leaned back, satisfied. "Follow these, kid, and you'll live to tell the tale." Curtis shook his head, laughing despite himself. "You're unbelievable." Rick grinned. "And yet, you love me." Curtis muttered, "Debatable." Later that afternoon, Curtis sat at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet but thinking about Sheila. About her laugh, her kindness, the way she made the office feel less like a cage and more like a place he wanted to be. He hated it. Hated that his heart was stirring after 3 years of dormancy. Hated that fear still clung to him like a second skin. He was so deep in thought, he almost missed the knock on his door. "Got a sec?" Sheila stood in the doorway, holding 2 coffees. Curtis blinked. Yeah." She stepped in, setting a cup on his desk. "Figured you could use a refill." Curtis smiled. "Thanks." She hesitated, then said softly, "You okay? You seem distant." Curtis swallowed hard. "Just a lot on my mind. Anything you want to talk about?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the words hovered on his tongue. "I'm scared. I don't know if I can trust again. But you make me want to try." Instead, he said, "Maybe later." Sheila smiled gently. "I'll hold you to that." Curtis watched her leave, heart pounding like a drum. Maybe later. Maybe soon. That night, Curtis sat on his porch with Rick, nursing beers under a sky smeared with stars. "You're falling for her," Rick said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Curtis stiffened. "I'm not." Rick smirked. "Kid, I've been around long enough to spot a man in denial." Curtis stared at his beer. "Even if I was, what's the point? Last time I trusted someone, it blew up in my face." Rick shrugged. "So what? You gonna let one grenade keep you out of the war?" Curtis shot him a look. "That's a terrible metaphor." Rick grinned. "Maybe. But listen, love's like construction. Messy, loud, sometimes dangerous. But when it's done right, worth every damn nail." Curtis chuckled. "You should write greeting cards." Rick raised his bottle. "To bad metaphors and second chances." Curtis clinked his against Rick's, smiling faintly. "Second chances, huh?" Rick winked. "Don't blow it." The next day started like any other. Emails, phone calls, a meeting about a new housing project. Curtis was in the middle of drafting a proposal when Ryan burst into his office, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Bro," Ryan said, breathless. "You're not gonna believe this." Curtis frowned. "What?" Ryan hesitated. "Marissa's here." Curtis froze. "What?" Ryan nodded grimly. "She's in the lobby. With her mom." Curtis felt the blood drain from his face. "Why?" "No idea," Ryan said. "But they look intense." Curtis stood slowly, heart hammering. 3 years of silence. And now this? Why now? He found them near the reception desk. Marissa, still stunning in that polished, Instagram-perfect way, and her mother, clutching a designer purse like it was a weapon. Curtis stopped a few feet away, voice cold. "What do you want?" Marissa turned, eyes wide, lips trembling like she'd practiced this in the mirror. "Curtis, please. I need to talk to you." "No," Curtis said flatly. "You don't." Her mom stepped forward, tone sharp. "Curtis, don't be cruel. She's been through hell." Curtis laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Hell? She kissed John on a dance floor while I was in the bathroom." Marissa flinched. "I know. I was stupid. Blind. But you were right. John wanted more. And when you left, he dropped me." Curtis stared, incredulous. "So now that your backup plan bailed, you come crawling back?" Marissa's eyes filled with tears. "It's not like that. I made a mistake. A huge one. And I've paid for it every day." Curtis shook his head. "You didn't pay?" "I did." Her mom bristled. "Curtis, you loved her once." "Loved," Curtis said sharply. Past tense. Marissa reached for his arm. "Please, just hear me out." Before Curtis could respond, A voice cut through the tension like a blade. Wow, Sheila said, stepping into the lobby with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is awkward. Curtis turned, heart lurching. Sheila. She walked up, calm but crackling with energy. Let me guess. You thought you could waltz back into his life after blowing it to pieces? Marissa blinked. Sheila held up a hand. Save it. Curtis doesn't owe you closure. He doesn't owe you forgiveness. And he sure as hell doesn't owe you a second chance. Her mom sputtered. Who do you think you are? Sheila smiled sweetly. Someone who actually respects him. Curtis stared, stunned, as Sheila stepped closer, her voice low and lethal. You had your shot, she said. You blew it. So do us all a favor, leave. Marissa's face crumpled. Her mom huffed. But after a long, tense beat, they turned and walked out, heels clicking like gunshots. Curtis exhaled slowly, adrenaline buzzing in his veins. Sheila. She looked at him, eyes soft now. You okay? Curtis nodded, throat tight. Yeah, thanks. Sheila smiled faintly. Anytime. As she walked away, Curtis felt something shift, like a door opening in a room he thought was locked forever. That night, Curtis sat on his porch again, staring at the stars. Rick joined him, dropping into the chair with a grunt. Heard about the showdown, Rick said, grinning. Hell of a woman. Curtis smiled. Yeah, she is. Rick raised his beer. So what's next? Curtis looked at the sky, heart lighter than it had been in years. Maybe. I stopped being a ghost. Rick clinked his bottle against Curtis's. About damn time. Chapter 6. First dates and bad advice. Curtis had faced plenty of challenges in his life. Tight deadlines, angry clients, even a rogue raccoon in the company warehouse. But nothing felt as terrifying as staring at his phone, thumb hovering over Sheila's number. Rick's voice echoed in his head. Don't let fear turn you into a ghost. Easy for Rick to say. Rick had 2 ex-wives and a Harley. Curtis had trust issues and a heart that still limped from old wounds. He took a breath, hit dial. Hello. Sheila's voice was warm, curious. Hey. Curtis said, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. It's Curtis. I know, she teased. Caller ID works. Curtis chuckled, nerves buzzing. Right. Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner sometime. A pause. Then, dinner? Like a date. Curtis swallowed. Yeah, like a date. Sheila's smile was audible. I'd love to. Curtis exhaled, relief flooding him. Great. Friday. Friday works, she said. Pick me up at 7? 7. Curtis repeated, like he was carving it into stone. See you then. He hung up, staring at the phone like it had just performed a miracle. Rick found him in the break room later, grinning like a man who'd won the lottery. You asked her out, Rick said, voice booming. Curtis groaned. How do you know? Ryan told me, Rick said. Kid, this is huge. You need my help. Curtis raised an eyebrow. Help? Rick slapped a notebook on the counter, the same one from before. Dating tips. Rick's edition. Curtis sighed. God help me. Rick flipped it open. Rule 1. Always compliment her shoes. Curtis frowned. Her shoes. Women love that, Rick said. Shows you notice details. Curtis muttered. Pretty sure personality matters more. Rick waved a hand. Details, kid. Rule 2. Never order spaghetti. Curtis blinked. Why? Sloppy, Rick said. You'll look like a toddler in a food fight. Curtis chuckled. Noted. Rule 3. Rick said, leaning in. Confidence is key. Walk in like you own the place. Curtis smirked. And if I trip? Then own that too, Rick said. Laugh. Make it charming. Women love a man who can laugh at himself. Curtis shook his head, smiling despite himself. You're insane. Rick grinned. And yet, you're listening. Friday arrived like a freight train. Curtis spent an hour debating shirts, another 30 minutes fixing his hair, and 10 full minutes staring in the mirror, wondering if he looked like a man who had his life together or a man who Googled how to date after heartbreak at 2 a.m. He settled on a navy button-down, jeans, and the faint hope that Rick's advice wouldn't ruin him. Sheila lived in a cozy townhouse with a porch swing and potted plants that looked like they had better social lives than Curtis. She opened the door wearing a simple black dress and a smile that made his pulse trip over itself. Wow, Curtis said before he could stop himself. You look amazing. Sheila laughed. Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself. Curtis grinned, offering his arm like some old-school gentleman. Ready? Ready, she said, locking the door behind her. The restaurant was a small Italian place with soft lighting and the faint hum of jazz. Curtis held the door for her, remembering Rick's advice about confidence. He walked in like he owned the place, until he nearly collided with a waiter carrying a tray of wine glasses. Sorry, Curtis yelped, catching himself just in time. Sheila laughed, eyes sparkling. Smooth. Curtis grinned sheepishly. I meant to do that. They settled into a corner booth, menus in hand. Curtis scanned the options, remembering Rick's warning. No spaghetti, he muttered under his breath. Sheila tilted her head. What? Nothing, Curtis said quickly. Just thinking. She smiled. You're cute when you overthink. Curtis chuckled, nerves easing. So how's Max? Sheila's face lit up. My dog? He's great. Ate half a couch cushion yesterday. Curtis laughed. Sounds like a rebel. Total anarchist, she said. But he's loyal. Curtis nodded, something warm blooming in his chest. Loyal. The word felt like sunlight. Dinner flowed like water, easy, effortless. They talked about everything. Childhood stories, favorite movies, the time Curtis accidentally glued his fingers together during a DIY project. Sheila laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Your trouble, she said, eyes dancing. Guilty, Curtis replied, grinning. By dessert, Curtis felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Outside, the night was cool, stars scattered like diamonds. Curtis walked Sheila to her door, heart thudding. I had a great time, she said softly. Me too, Curtis replied. Really great. She smiled, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just her. The curve of her lips, the warmth in her eyes. Curtis hesitated, then leaned in. The kiss was soft, tentative, like testing the water before diving in. Sheila kissed him back, gentle but sure. When they pulled apart, Curtis felt like he could breathe for the first time in years. Good night, Sheila whispered. Good night, Curtis said, voice low. He walked to his car, grinning like an idiot, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to joy. Back home, Rick was waiting on the porch like a watchdog with a beer. Well, Rick demanded. How'd it go? Curtis grinned. Great. Rick slapped his knee. Did you compliment her shoes? Curtis laughed. No. Rick gasped. Kid. That was rule 1. Curtis shook his head, smiling. Didn't need it. Rick grinned. So you kissed her? Curtis blinked. How do you? Kid, I can smell romance, Rick said, tapping his nose. Like a bloodhound. Curtis chuckled, sinking into a chair. Rick, I think I'm in trouble. Rick raised an eyebrow. The good kind. Curtis smiled faintly. Yeah, the good kind. Rick lifted his beer. To trouble. Curtis clinked his bottle against Rick's, laughter spilling into the night. For the first time in 3 years, Curtis didn't feel broken. He felt alive. And maybe, just maybe, love wasn't a scam after all. Chapter 7. Love without ledgers. Curtis had always believed relationships were like contracts, terms, conditions, mutual obligations. After Marissa, that belief calcified into something harsher. Love was a ledger, and someone always came up short. But Sheila was rewriting the rules. It started small. A text on Monday morning. Hope your meeting goes well. You've got this. A coffee left on his desk with a sticky note. Survival fuel. A laugh that made the office feel less like fluorescent purgatory and more like sunlight. Curtis found himself smiling more. Sleeping better. Even Rick noticed. You've got that stupid grin, Rick said one afternoon, leaning against Curtis's doorframe like a man who'd invented smugness. The kind men get when they're in deep. Curtis rolled his eyes. It's called being happy. Rick grinned. Same thing. By the third date, Curtis realized something terrifying. He wasn't keeping score. He wasn't tallying favors or measuring effort. He wasn't wondering if Sheila liked him as much as he liked her. He just enjoyed her. It was a revelation, and it scared the hell out of him. One Friday night, Curtis invited Sheila over for dinner. He cooked. Actual cooking, not the microwave and pray method he'd perfected in college. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary, and Curtis felt oddly proud. Sheila walked in, eyes widening. Wow, this looks amazing. Curtis grinned. I bribed the chicken to behave. She laughed, slipping off her coat. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, Curtis said simply. Her smile softened. That's sweet. Dinner was easy. Conversation flowing like wine, laughter bubbling up without effort. Afterward, they sat on the couch, a movie playing in the background but forgotten as they talked about everything and nothing. At one point, Sheila said quietly, You know, you're different. Curtis blinked. Different how? She shrugged. Most guys I've dated, they keep score. Like, I did this for you, so you owe me. You don't. Curtis stared at her, something shifting inside him. Maybe I used to, he admitted. But I learned the hard way. Love isn't a scoreboard. Sheila smiled, eyes warm. That's rare. Curtis swallowed. So is someone like you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Then Sheila leaned in, and Curtis met her halfway. The kiss was soft, sure, and Curtis felt something break open inside him, a door he thought was sealed forever. The next morning, Curtis woke up with sunlight streaming through the blinds and a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He made coffee, humming under his breath, until Rick barged in like a human hurricane. Morning, Romeo. Rick boomed, grabbing a mug. So, how was date night? Curtis groaned. Do you ever knock? Rick grinned. Do you ever answer questions? Curtis shook his head, smiling despite himself. It was good. Rick raised an eyebrow. Good as in we talked about the weather. Or good as in you're grinning like a man who just found religion. Curtis chuckled. The second one. Rick slapped his knee. Attaboy. So what's next? Curtis hesitated. I don't know. Just taking it slow. Rick snorted. Slow's fine. Just don't stall so long she thinks you're dead. Curtis laughed. Noted. Over the next few weeks, Curtis and Sheila settled into a rhythm. Dinners, walks, late-night talks that stretched until dawn. Curtis felt lighter, freer, like he'd shed a weight he didn't know he was carrying. His family noticed, of course. Subtlety wasn't their strong suit. One Sunday, his mom cornered him in the kitchen. So, she said, stirring a pot like it owed her money. When are you bringing Sheila to family dinner again? Curtis blinked. We just had dinner last week. His mom smiled sweetly. And, we like her. Curtis sighed. You like meddling. Ryan popped his head in, grinning. We're planning the wedding. Curtis choked on his coffee. What? Rick strolled in, arms wide. I call best man. Curtis groaned. You're all insane. His mom patted his cheek. We just want you happy. Curtis muttered. Pretty sure happiness involves boundaries. Rick winked. Boundaries are for fences. Despite the chaos, Curtis couldn't deny it. he was happy. Really, truly happy. And for the first time in years, he believed something he thought was dead. Love wasn't a scam. It was messy, risky, terrifying, but real. One night, Curtis and Shiela sat on his porch, stars scattered like diamonds overhead. The air was cool, the kind that made you want to linger. You ever think about how we got here? Shiela asked softly. Curtis glanced at her. All the time. She smiled. Life's weird. Curtis chuckled. Understatement. She hesitated, then said, Curtis, I know you've been hurt. I'm not her. I'm not going to keep score. I'm not going to make you doubt yourself. Curtis swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. I know, he said quietly. And I'm done keeping score too. Shiela reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. Good. Curtis looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. Later, as Shiela rested her head on his shoulder and the night hummed around them, Curtis thought about everything he'd learned. Love wasn't about ledgers or guarantees. It wasn't about avoiding pain or controlling outcomes. It was about showing up, fully, fearlessly, even when the world had taught you to flinch. And Curtis Donovan was done flinching. Chapter 8. Grenades and Goodbyes. Curtis had learned 2 things about life. 1. Happiness attracts chaos. 2. Rick will always have a front row seat when chaos arrives. He was in the office, reviewing a new marketing proposal, when Ryan burst in like a man fleeing a crime scene. Bro, Ryan said, breathless. You're not gonna believe this. Curtis groaned. If this is about the coffee machine again, it's Marissa, Ryan cut in. She's here. Curtis froze. What? Ryan nodded grimly. And she's making a scene. Curtis stood slowly, heart thudding. Where? Lobby, Ryan said. And she brought props. Curtis frowned. Props? Ryan grimaced. Flowers. And a sign. Curtis blinked. A sign. Ryan nodded. Big one. Says, take me back. Curtis stared. You're kidding. Ryan shook his head. Wish I was. Curtis walked into the lobby and stopped dead. There she was, Marissa, in full dramatic glory, clutching a bouquet of roses and standing beside a poster board that looked like it had been stolen from a middle school pep rally. The sign read, Curtis, love deserves a second chance, in glitter letters. Curtis pinched the bridge of his nose. Marissa? She turned, eyes wide, voice trembling like a soap opera audition. Curtis, please, just hear me out. No, Curtis said flatly. We've done this. Her mom appeared from behind the sign, clutching her purse like a weapon. Curtis, don't be cruel. She's trying. Curtis laughed, a short, sharp sound. Trying now? After 3 years. Marissa stepped closer, tears shimmering. I was wrong. About everything. John, he was a mistake. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Curtis shook his head. You didn't think that when you kissed him on a dance floor. Her mom bristled. People make mistakes. Curtis's voice was ice. Mistakes don't happen on purpose. Before Marissa could respond, the elevator dinged, and out stepped Shiela, looking like calm wrapped in steel. She took in the scene, the flowers, the glitter sign, the audience of curious employees, and smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Well, Shiela said, voice sweet as honey. This is creative. Marissa stiffened. Who are you? Someone who respects him. Shiela said, stepping closer. Unlike you. Her mom sputtered. This is between them. Sheila's smile sharpened. Not anymore. Curtis opened his mouth, but Shiela beat him to it. Her tone soft, lethal. You had your shot, she said. You blew it. And now you think you can waltz back in with glitter and guilt? Cute. But no. Marissa's face crumpled. I love him. Shiela tilted her head. Then you should have acted like it when it mattered. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Employees pretended to check their phones, but their ears were practically doing cartwheels. And then, like a gift from the comedy gods, Rick appeared, coffee in one hand, donut in the other, grinning like a man who'd just found free cable. Well, Rick said, surveying the scene. Looks like we've got ourselves a rom-com climax. Curtis groaned. Rick held up a hand. Kid, let me handle this. He turned to Marissa, eyes twinkling. Sweetheart, you ever hear the phrase, don't dig up graves to plant flowers? Marissa blinked. What? Rick took a bite of his donut, chewing thoughtfully. Means the past is dead. Leave it buried. Her mom huffed. This is none of your business. Rick grinned. Lady, everything's my business when it happens in my lobby. Curtis muttered. Technically not your lobby. Rick ignored him, stepping closer to Marissa. Listen, you had a good run. 3 years, right? That's like 30 in dog years. Be grateful. Marissa's lip trembled. You don't understand. Rick chuckled. Oh, I do. I've been married twice. Both times ended with me eating cold pizza and questioning my life choices. But you know what I didn't do? Show up with glitter. Curtis choked on a laugh. Shiela bit hers back, eyes sparkling. Rick leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Here's a tip. If you need arts and crafts to win a man back, you've already lost. The lobby erupted in muffled snickers. Marissa flushed crimson. Curtis stepped forward, voice calm but firm. Marissa, this ends now. I've moved on. You need to do the same. Her mom opened her mouth, but Curtis cut her off. Leave. Please. After a long, tense beat, Marissa dropped the flowers, grabbed the sign, and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots. Her mom followed, muttering under her breath. Rick watched them go, then turned to Curtis with a grin. Well, that was fun. Curtis sighed. You're unbelievable. Rick winked. And yet, You love me. Later, Curtis found Sheila in his office, leaning against his desk with that smile, the one that made his pulse trip over itself. You okay? She asked softly. Curtis nodded. Thanks for everything. Sheila shrugged. She needed to hear it. Curtis smiled faintly. So did I. Sheila tilted her head. What do you mean? Curtis stepped closer, heart pounding. I mean, I'm done looking back. I want to move forward with you. Her eyes softened, warmth blooming like sunrise. Good, she whispered. Because I'm not going anywhere. Curtis kissed her then, soft, sure, sealing a promise neither of them needed to speak. That night, Curtis sat on his porch with Rick, because of course Rick was there, beer in hand, grin plastered across his face. Well, kid, Rick said, raising his bottle. You survived the grenade. Curtis chuckled. Barely. Rick winked. And you got the girl. Curtis smiled, heart light. Yeah, I did. Rick lifted his beer in a toast. To second chances, and no glitter. Curtis laughed, clinking his bottle against Rick's. No glitter. As the stars blinked overhead and laughter spilled into the night, Curtis realized something simple, something true. Love doesn't keep score. It doesn't demand perfection or penance. It just asks you to show up, fully, fearlessly, and without glitter. And for the first time in years, Curtis Donovan was all in. Epilogue. No glitter, just forever. The Donovan family porch had seen a lot over the years. Birthday parties, summer barbecues, late-night confessions. But tonight, it was hosting something new. Peace. Curtis sat on the swing, arm draped around Sheila, watching fireflies blink in the yard like tiny lanterns. The air was warm, the kind that smelled faintly of cut grass and possibility. For the first time in years, Curtis felt whole. You know, Sheila said softly, your family's wild. Curtis chuckled. Understatement. They mean well, she added, smiling. Curtis grinned. They mean chaos. Sheila laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. I like them. Curtis kissed her hair, heart swelling. They like you too. Maybe a little too much. She tilted her head, teasing. Ryan already asked if he could DJ our wedding. Curtis groaned. Of course he did. The screen door creaked, and Rick appeared like a storm cloud with a grin. Beer in one hand, a plate of brownies in the other. Lovebirds, Rick announced, dropping into a chair. Don't mind me. Just here for the sugar. Curtis smirked. You ever knock? Rick winked. Knocking's for strangers. He bit into a brownie, crumbs scattering like confetti. So, when's the big day? Curtis blinked. What? Rick grinned. Don't play dumb. You're glowing like a man who's about to buy a ring. Sheila laughed, cheeks pink. Curtis shook his head, smiling. We're taking it slow. Rick snorted. Slow's fine. Just don't stall so long she thinks you're dead. Curtis chuckled. Noted. Rick leaned back, eyes twinkling. You know, kid, I gotta hand it to you. You crawled out of the wreckage, dusted yourself off, and found something real. Curtis smiled faintly. Yeah, I did. Rick raised his beer in a toast. To second chances, and no glitter. Curtis laughed, clinking his bottle against Rick's. No glitter. Later, after Rick wandered off muttering about brownies and bad country music, Curtis and Sheila stayed on the porch, silence stretching like a warm blanket. You okay? Sheila asked softly. Curtis nodded. Better than okay. She smiled. Good. Curtis looked at her, really looked at her, the curve of her smile, the kindness in her eyes, and felt something settle deep inside him. Love wasn't a scam. It wasn't a ledger. It wasn't about keeping score or guarding your heart like a fortress. It was about showing up. Fully. Fearlessly. Even when the world had taught you to flinch. And Curtis Donovan was done flinching. Months later, the Donovan family gathered for a backyard party, grills smoking, laughter spilling into the summer air. Curtis stood with Sheila, hand in hand, while Ryan tried to teach Rick how to use TikTok. Kid, Rick said, squinting at the phone. What's a For You page? Sounds like a scam. Curtis laughed, shaking his head. Stick to brownies, Rick. Rick grinned. Fair enough. Curtis looked around, at his family, at Sheila, at the life he'd rebuilt, and felt gratitude hum through him like a quiet song. He'd been broken. He'd been burned. But he'd learned something priceless. Love doesn't keep score. It doesn't demand perfection. It just asks you to try. And Curtis Donovan was all in. No glitter. No ledgers. Just love, and maybe a little Rick.